I'm going to speak today about wine barrels and water pots. Wine barrels and water pots. Where do you see wine barrels and water pots coming together? Which passage? Yeah, wedding at Cana, right? Like, especially I decided on this topic, and after seeing all the festivity and we have here and the feast we just had at Thanksgiving, and so I thought it was kind of appropriate to revisit what happened in Cana. So can somebody help me with this? Wedding at Cana, John's Gospel, chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. Sojit is my official reader normally. He has the best sound, the best voice. And so, can you read this for us? It's 11 verses.
On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." So they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now, and take it to the head waiter." So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, "Every man serves a good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poorer wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This beginning of the signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him.
Amen. So this was the first miracle Jesus did in Cana, right? Pretty interesting miracle. It's funny. I have witnessed a miracle which is kind of a miracle very similar to this happened at our house one day. Almost literally, but it's a funny story because when I went back this time, we were reminiscing on some of these old things happened in our village, in our house. And so anyway, around 30 years ago, that's when we came to faith. And so we decided, we had a Orthodox Christian background, then we happened to hear the word of God from born-again preachers, and then we decided to go to a Bible-believing church, and there were no churches in that neighborhood at that time. And so we decided to, the first Pentecostal church in our little village started in our house, because the nearest church at that time was around 15 kilometers, that was in Cochin City. So the first India Pentecostal church, the Pentecostal church in our little town started in our house. And there were probably around 10 to 20 people. We were there, like right now we have around 200, 300 people, our own church building, and it has become like a big church in that area. But at that time, when we started this church, I was still a teenager, and my dad and my mom, and they were organizing the whole thing, and we didn't have a pastor. We could not afford to have a pastor. So we had a very old pastor, like in his late 70s or something like that. He would come every day, every Sunday from a place called Chalakudi near Trichur. And that will be around 30 kilometers from our place. So he will come every Sunday morning, and he will conduct the service. And then after the service, he will leave. So that's all the pastoral support we had for this little church. But this pastor was a very nice guy. He has passed away, and he is with the Lord. He's the most wonderful person I've seen. But at the same time, he was very, how do you say that? He was very stubborn. He was very stubborn in his way. When he decides something, as a pastor, nobody can question him. So we were all really afraid of him, and whatever he says goes. That's the way it used to be. But thankfully, he will only come on Sunday morning, and then he will Sunday afternoon. So we don't have to worry much about him. But I still remember one Sunday he came, and he said, so we used to do communion once every month. Okay, once every month, that was the way we could do communion. We needed a pastor, so it was very difficult to organize anyway. So one Sunday he came, and he said, we need to do communion today, he said. But technically, that was not the day for communion. But he decided that communion has to be done that day, and then nobody can say no. So he told my dad, and who is arranging everything. My dad, I still remember looking at the kitchen as a teenager. I'm still a kid in a way. So I'm looking at the big panic going on in the kitchen because the pastor wanted to do communion, and my mother said, wine is finished. There is no wine. Because she didn't expect, back in the days, we used to have this something called squash. I think it's like a juice, right? Grape juice you get in the bottle and then you add water. I don't know how many of you know that. I don't know if you have it here. Here we have like Tang or the powder. But anyway, so that was the thing. So unfortunately, my mother was not prepared. And then, so she said, no, I don't have squash. And then my dad wasn't panicking. And she said, maybe we can ask the neighbor. We asked the neighbor. They don't have any grape squash. And then my mother say, I still remember my mother saying, can we do with pineapple? No, we cannot do it with pineapple because it's yellow. It has to be dark. And, and can we say the pastor? No, pastor won't approve because Jesus will somehow understand, but pastor won't. So we have to somehow make this happen. And I still remember the panic of wine finishing, and they're trying to come up with an alternate. And in the end, this gentleman who was a farmer, like a poor, nice guy, but now when I think back, he's one of the most intelligent guys I've ever seen. So he said, I'll do something. I'll go to the nearby town in his little bicycle, which is like 2 kilometers away. So he said, I'll go and get something. We have only half an hour left before the service starts. So he went to the shop, and it's a Sunday morning. Hardly any shops were open. He couldn't find grape squash. So what he did was, this was a big secret for around 30 years, and it was finally disclosed, this during my trip, because I was one of the only few witnesses. Don't ask me the theology of it. So what this poor farmer did was, he went and bought a crate of Thumbs Up. How many? Like Coca-Cola? Back in, we used to have something called Thumbs Up, which was very same as Coca-Cola or Pepsi. And he brought it home because, they were all afraid of the pastor to say no to the pastor. And what they did was they opened the Thumbs Up and they filled the communion, the bowl. Instead of the wine, they used the Pepsi, or they used Thumbs Up, and they did communion. And I wonder about, nobody knew that. I mean, I myself don't want to be like one of the accused in that. It's my dad, and it's, all the secretary and the president who were inside panicking, and they did that. And somehow it went well for people who didn't know what was happening. Again, I don't know the theology of it. I don't know what Jesus is going to think about it. But people really enjoyed, and some people really said after the service, there was a good kick for the wine today. And even the pastor who said, well, brother, after the communion, he burped and he said, brother, next time when you buy communion, when you buy that squash or the communion thing, make sure you buy from the same shop. Okay, it was very good because nobody really knew. That memory, I still remember when I went there as a kid watching it, right? The reason I was saying this, I remember looking at the kitchen and the panic happening when the wine was finished, almost like this. And I'm looking at this wedding scene in Cana, and wine finishing is not only the fact that something of the feast is done, but it is a cultural shame because wine, as you know, is an essential part of the feast. And it is not like anything else. If you invite somebody to a feast in India, like we have sambar. Sometimes the sambar finishes. I've seen some caterers adding water to it, and just to, even though it is light, it still tastes like sambar. But wine is not something you can do like that. You cannot manipulate like that. And wine is such an essential thing. It's like a vegetarian. If you are invited to do a vegetarian meal, I don't know how many of you like vegetarian meal. I don't, as a matter of fact. But when you are invited to a vegetarian meal, you eat all this vegetarian thing, even if you don't like it much, hoping that normally at the end of the vegetarian meal, there is something called, in Malayalam, we call payasam, right? or kheer in Hindi or something. So even though we don't like that first part, we are hoping that in the anticipation of that final payasam or the kheer, we still eat it. And in the end, somebody comes and tells that, oh, kheer is finished. Then how disappointed we will be, how angry we will be, how irritated we will be, especially in a wedding feast. And we will say all those bad things about these people who organize. How can they even do that? Couldn't they estimate? And, they are so cheap. They didn't buy enough wine. They didn't invest enough for their daughter's or son's wedding. And so it was such a cultural shame. And that was also the reason for panic, not the scarcity of wine itself, but it's a cultural shame that is coming on to them, right? Does that make sense? So while all this panic is happening, there is one lady, and she is, the irony of it, when they have this big problem, big panic, big issue happening in the kitchen, the solution to that problem is sitting in the living room. That's the irony of it. The problem is happening in the kitchen, and the solution is right there in the living room. But nobody gets to see this. They are all panicking. How can we? That happens to us too, right? When something happens to us, we immediately, how can we go to the neighbor, borrow some money, or, maybe look for that job? And we need to do all this kind of stuff. But at the same time, the solution is just a wall apart. And Jesus is there. Only one lady, one person in that scene can see both problem and solution. And we being so-called born-again sect or evangelicals or Pentecostal, we very often look a little down on Mary, the mother of Jesus, because the Orthodox churches or the other churches tend to venerate her. So we kind of intentionally try to pull her down a little bit. But the fact is that she is called the blessed among all the women, right? And the reason is not just that she bore the Son of God, which in itself is a great thing. Whether it is a merit or so, it is an act of grace. But that itself makes her a blessed woman. But even otherwise, a woman who could see both problem and solution at the same time. She has one eye on the problem and the other eye on the solution. See, that's what makes her a great intercessor. And we had this big issue with the Orthodox churches and all that about intercession. We say we should never use intercessors in prayer or mediators. It is so true because in Orthodox churches and the denominational churches, they very often pray to the intercessor than Jesus himself, right? So that's where it goes wrong. But we are called to be intercessors. And the ministry of an intercessor is to see problem and solution at the same time. Now that is the ministry of intercession. That is the gift of intercession in prayer. See, nobody went to Mary and said that we have an issue, Mary. Like we need to, can you help us? Now that's what we do. That's where everything goes wrong, right? So that's when we are looking for help in the wrong places. Now that's a wrong example of intercession which is happening all over the world in Catholic churches or denominational churches, whatever you call it. But Mary did not say that, oh, okay, I can see this, but let them come to me. Sometimes we do that too. Yeah, I think I can help them, but they didn't ask me. They didn't come to me. They told the pastor, they told Lali and Dee, but they didn't tell me. Let them come to me, then I can help. No, Mary didn't have any of this. They didn't even know that Mary is interceding for them. So Mary went to the only person who can give solution to the big problem they are facing, and there happens the intercession, and Jesus answers her request, right? And again, we wonder about that part too. What was Jesus' response at first? What did Jesus say first when Mary went to Jesus? Yeah, my hour has not come. Yeah, like many mothers, mothers have a gift of pestering their kids when pushing them to do something they don't want to do and study or many things. The mothers are particularly good at pestering the kids, and it's almost funny as it is. That's kind of the scene that happens. So she comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, "No, it's not my time yet. I don't, but doesn't he still do that, right? Why do you think so? So do you think Mary has the capacity to even affect or influence the will of God to change the timing of Jesus? What do you think about it? Because this is a question very often nominal Christians might ask you. Yes, intercession might be wrong, and yes, praying to Mother Mary might be wrong, but this Mother Mary told Jesus, and Jesus said, "My hour has not come," but yet he did what she wanted him to do. So which kind of gives a little power for Mary on Mary's prayer, right? Don't you think so? Why do you think Jesus acted that way? Why do you think Jesus said no, but then, what is that? It didn't, sorry? Yeah, he expected, yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah. Well, just this is not part of the sermon, but I'm kind of getting a flow on it. So I'll just divert just a bit to say something. John chapter 7 verse 6. If you read John chapter 7 verse 6. Yes, so this is another episode, okay? This is when Jesus' brothers say, everybody goes to the Jerusalem for the festival of booths. And then Jesus decided not to go. Jesus remains in Galilee instead of going to Jerusalem like everybody else. So his brothers come to him and say, "Hey, Jesus, we know that you're doing some great things. You have done amazing miracles in this area, and you're a great teacher. You have come to this world with a great purpose." That's what you say. So why don't you go and show yourself to the world? And why don't you do what you have come to do, right? Then Jesus says the same. It's actually, the English, but the actual translation is just the same. It's the same thing he told Mary. So Jesus said to them, "My time is not yet here." It was the same thing he told Mary. "My hour has not yet come." It's the same in the root language. So what does that mean? So in John chapter 2, he said, "My hour has not come," that he did this miracle. But then when you come after 5 chapters in John chapter 7, his hour has not yet come. So but we thought it already came. He already did the miracle, right? See, so this is this is again to be. I mean, if you're interested, we have talked about this before too. The only purpose, the very purpose for which Jesus came was, as somebody mentioned here, is to die for humanity, right? I reminded that back in our retreat time too. Like Mel Gibson came up with this logo for his movie Passion of the Christ. Dying was the reason for his living. So we all are born in this world to live, right? Death is an inevitability, right? So it is inevitable. We all will die, but nobody in this world is born so that they could die. We are all born so that we could live. Jesus is the only human being who is born in this world to die for the very purpose of dying. And in another place, Jesus said, like Moses lifted up the brazen serpent, the Son of God will be lifted up, and then he will attract everybody to himself. You remember that verse? I don't want to go into it because it's a big diversion. The part I'm going to say is the purpose for which Jesus came here and the very hour he is talking about, the very hour he is revealing himself to the world is when he is on the cross. That is the real hour. That is why even when he did many miracles, he said, "Don't tell this to anybody. Keep it a secret." Even when his disciple Peter recognized that you are the Son of the living God, he is trying to kind of make it like a hush thing because he wanted to eventually go to the cross. Only on the cross his hour will come. Only in the cross his identity will be truly revealed. And here what Mother Mary is trying to do is reveal yourself to the world. It's not about wine, because Mary knows more than everybody else. Her son is an amazing person. She saw the angel. The angel told her who he is, what his true identity is. Mary is the only other person who knows that, like Jesus himself knows. So Mary cannot wait for his son to be revealed to the world and to be him to be the savior of the world. And that's what Jesus is saying. Mary, my hour has not come. It is not about changing water to wine. It's not about doing a miracle. My hour, it's the same thing he would have responded to his brothers in chapter 7. The same thing. The brothers say, reveal yourself. And then he said, no, my hour has not come. My hour comes only in Calvary. The point is that it has nothing much to say, much to do about the miracle of Cana or the miracle that happened anywhere else, okay? So, in the remaining 15 minutes or so, let me, the one thing funny I found in this parable is, why didn't Jesus ask the people, the servants, to fill water in the wine barrels? For example, don't you think that, they had wine in the beginning, right? Where do they keep wine? In wine barrels, right? Or wine bottles or whatever. Let's assume it's a big feast. So they keep it in wine barrels. So why didn't Jesus ask them to fill water in the wine barrel so that he could make it wine? Instead, he said, go outside and bring that water pots and fill them with water, then I will make wine. Don't you find that a little odd? Like after the church, Anita comes to me, and Anita always makes tea or coffee and all that. So Anita comes to me and says, Pastor Mathew, sorry, there's no coffee, and I need coffee. There's no coffee, tea, everything is finished. So I say, oh, Anita, don't worry about that. I'm going to make some water into tea. Okay, I'm going to, we have learned that in the seminary. So how I'm going to do that amazing miracle like Jesus did. So, and I will ask Anita, why don't you fill the tea pot with water, right? So that I can make it into tea. Instead, if I ask Anita or any of you, why don't you go to the laundry room and the bathroom and bring all those plastic buckets you have, fill them with water, I'm going to make tea. Well, do you think that's the right way to do it? And even if I make tea like that, do you think you will drink it? No, that doesn't make any sense. And that's what I was thinking. Why would Jesus, instead of there are wine barrels, but Jesus chose to bring this water pots from elsewhere and fill them with water. Fill them with water, and then he turned it to wine. Now, I thought that was very interesting. Because first of all, I don't know how many of you drink wine or have drunk wine before, and as you probably know, California is probably the wine capital of America. Californian wines are very famous, and even when we have guests at our house, who are not Indians, obviously, they bring wine as a gift. It's a very common thing. In day before yesterday, we had a guest, and they were not Indians, and they came with a bottle of wine, and apparently it's a very expensive wine, and I like grape juice, and I don't mind drinking wine, but I think it's very bitter. I don't like the taste of it. I don't know why people so enjoy drinking wine, but it is, being in California, I know how important it is, and we have another bottle of wine too, because we don't drink it. We probably re-gift it, or so we keep it in the fridge. And then we realize that people who knows about wine, they say we are not supposed to keep wine in a fridge. Yes, I think you know a little bit about that, right? So this is very delicate stuff. We don't know. I mean, I don't care where it is kept. But yeah, you're not supposed to keep it in a fridge because the temperature if you go to some of the expensive homes, like rich people's home, they have a room dedicated for keeping wine called wine cellars. And they also I think even the light, not only the temperature, even the light itself, it should not be too dark, it should not be too bright, and because it can be light sensitive, the fermentation process. And also I learned that the wine bottle should not be kept like the soda bottles we kept. It has to be kept sideways. I didn't know all this. There are a lot of technicalities in the wine thing. The point I'm trying to make is wine barrels and wine bottles are more important than wine itself, because you have to take proper care of them. Wine barrels are made with properly cured kind of some kind of specific wood. Because even Jesus himself said, you cannot fill new wine on old wineskins or something like that. So the container is extremely important. It's very expensive. Very important to have the proper container. So what I'm saying is, if we have these expensive wine barrels, and if someone asks us to fill that with water, on the face of it, we might reject it because it's very expensive. We can get more wine elsewhere, but I don't want to spoil the wine barrels, right? And quite often that happens to us too. I don't know about you, but that happens to us too, because we are not very willing to, we are in our past. We live in our past. We are these wine barrels, like fat wine barrels. We used to dispense a lot of wine. We used to bring a lot of revival. We used to do a lot of miracles. And we live in our past, and we don't want anything new to happen. And we are not sure if this new thing that is coming in is going to affect us or not. So very often wine barrels will reject. Wine barrels will not appreciate water being poured into it. And wine barrels will ask, why should Jesus use water to do this miracle? Can Jesus just say, let there be wine, there will be wine? Don't you think so? Why did Jesus do all this drama? He can just say, okay, wine's finished, let there be wine. The wine will come from the wine barrels, right? So we wonder why, why, I want wine. I don't want to do any water business. But the funny thing is that water is the prerequisite of wine. You need to fill the barrels or the pots or whatever we have with wine, with water first, in order, so that can be turned into wine. The true miracle is not necessarily always happening something out of nothing, but it is always the transformation that is happening within us. That is the true miracle. Water being turned into wine, the very DNA of it, the very characteristics of it, all the properties within it itself is changing. That's the true miracle. And I remember a story where an atheist science teacher confronted a little girl in the class, and she said, the teacher said, "You are a Christian?" So embarrassing. The kid said, "Yeah, I am a Christian." But he said, "Well, you read all this Bible stuff?" And she said, "Yes, I read the Bible stuff and I believe in it too." Then the teacher said, "Oh, it is written like Jesus changed water into wine. How can that even be possible? That will never happen. How can you believe something like that?" So the kid said, there's no problem believing that, because in my own house, Jesus changed liquor into furniture. I said, what? Jesus changed liquor into furniture in my house. Then she said, yeah, my father was a drunk. He used to drink whiskey and rum or whatever you have, all this liquor. One day Jesus came into his life, and with that money he used to spend at the liquor store, he bought a table for me, he bought a chair for me, he bought a bed for my sister. All those things he was spending for liquor. Now all those whiskey bottles and the brandy bottles are now being converted into furniture. See the transformation. That's the true miracle. That's exactly like changing water being changed into wine. The point I'm trying to make is we only want wine, but we don't think about filling us with water first. We need to fill us with water first so that wine will be produced. And we are trying to manufacture revival sometime. But the prerequisite of revival is to fill us with the Word of God and fill us with the grace of God. Then, only then will wine come out. And as a minister of the Word, I am not in charge of winemaking ministry. They don't teach us in seminary how to make water into wine. But the only thing they teach is how to fill water pots with water. That's the ministry we all can do. We are not the people who make wine. Only Jesus can make wine. The best thing we can do is to fill us with water. Fill us up to the brim and give it to him so that he can do that miracle within us. That true transformation, that revival, that is what we have to wait for. That's really what is happening in Cana. And sometime, I just share a quick story, which happened just a couple weeks ago. This is something which really makes me happy and keeps me going in ministry. Very often, as a minister, you get disappointed about stuff happens, but then you get one of the stories, and then I wanted to share this with you. So 6 years ago or so, I was a pastor in Toronto, right? And one of the church members in our pastor, one of the members in our church came to me, and he said, "Pastor, I want you to pray for my kid. Can you call my kid? She's going through a very different path, and somebody needs to counsel her." So I have never seen his daughter. She was around 21, 22 years at that time, white girl, so, culturally very different. And I'm kind of a fresh new pastor. I didn't know much about counseling and, all that kind of stuff. And she has never come to the church. And so I try to get her story. The story is that she, like typical teenagers, went into drugs and, all that kind of, all the roads. And and eventually she went with a man, and they had a child together. And so that again took her, way down to the bottom, and she is depression. She is using different kinds of drugs, and eventually she realized, or she declared, that she is a lesbian, and she doesn't want to live with men anymore. So she kind of married, not officially married. She is living with another woman in an apartment, and with this kid along with her. And then he asked me to call her and counsel her, or call her and, to invite her to church. And I'm I remember hearing that story and shuddering, and there's no way I can communicate with, people like that. The maximum kind of problem I have heard is the husband is drunk, or, he makes issues at home, or that's the kind of issues I normally hear back in India or so. So this is way down. I can't even handle. But on one day I decided, I still remember the day, thought I'm going to pray, and I got her cell number. Her name is Grace, by the way. I'm not going to reveal her last name. First name was Grace. I like that name. So I thought, I just got her cell number, and I decided to give her a call. So I called her number. She picked up. And this is around 6 years ago, yes. And I said, can I speak to Grace? She said, yes, who is this? I said, I'm Pastor Mathew from Stone Church. And the first response is, she said, I don't want to talk to any pastors. That's the first response. So I didn't know what to say. So immediately what I said is that's great, Grace, because I don't want to talk to any pastors either. And then she laughed. She didn't expect that to come from me, right? Then I said, Grace, you know what? Being a pastor, one of the things I struggle with is that always I talk with Christians. I always talk with pastors. They are my friends. I want to have some friends outside the circle. I want to talk to some other people. So would you do me a favor and come for a coffee with me? I'll pay for it. Why don't you come? And she couldn't say no because she laughed. It was funny the way it came out. And I don't know, I didn't prepare for it, but she came anyway. So she came and we met for a coffee, and she spoke for 3 hours. And that story she told me, you can make 3 Hollywood movies just like that. Action-packed, drama-packed movies. And I couldn't even fathom the kind of pain she has gone through, the agony she has gone through. All I did was, and I would like to say that, I shared with her this chapter and that chapter, and I brought her to Jesus. Nothing. I did nothing. I just listened to this, and I said, Grace, thank you for sharing the story. Would you mind if I just pray a word before we leave? And she said yes. And I prayed for her. And then I gave her a book. And I don't know how many of you heard an author called Philip Yancey. And he has written a book which is a classic. It is called What is So Amazing About Grace? That's the title of the book. And her name is Grace. So she thought that was very cool that I gave that to her. I said, Grace, I don't know how to respond to what you said, and I have no experience, and all I can do is just to pray for you. But I want you to read this book. And when I thought of you, when I heard your story, I thought you are an amazing person. And I have a friend who wrote a book kind of in your name. What is so amazing about Grace? Grace, I think you are amazing. I want you to read it. And I gave it to her. I've not seen that girl from that day. And immediately after that, she moved from Toronto to another place called Saskatchewan. And her dad came to me and said, she moved to Saskatchewan, and you know what? She started going to a church. And I was very excited. Really? And then after a month or so, her dad came and told me that she is in charge of their women's ministry now in that church. It's a very conservative evangelical church. And, then I left the church, but I was getting periodical updates through her dad and all that. And just 3 or 4 weeks ago, we saw in Facebook This Grace I saw, and I couldn't even recognize her. When I saw her, she had this, she was wearing a trouser, and she had this haircut like boys with the pink on one side and the blue on the other side. And, she wanted to look like a lesbian, and she wanted to act like a lesbian or whatever. And this girl who looks like a Greek goddess, like this, hair up to this, and with the wedding gown, and she's getting married, and I saw her wedding photo. And I realized that Grace is not the same Grace anymore. It's not the same I would have loved to say I did something about that. The fact is, I did nothing. I would have loved to say some words to her. I did nothing. All I did was giving her a book, and I said, "You are amazing." And I said, "I don't know how to make wine, Grace, but I know I will introduce you to a person who can make wine from your life." And I prayed to him. And he is the one who made this transformation. And it kind of filled my heart with such a joy. And I prayed to God, "Lord, I don't want to be a big crusade preacher. Or I don't want to be the next Benny Hinn or Billy Graham or whoever. All I need is 10 grace. 10 graces. If I get 10 graces, I'll be ready to quit." Because it's such an amazing transformation, powerful story of water turning into wine. And that is what is happening there. You need to have water to be turned into wine. Very often, I'm going to stop right here. What happens to us is, we are these water pots, right? And we go to God, and imagine there is a water pot called, I don't know, Tommy. One water pot's name is Tommy. And Tommy is very good water pot. But there is a small crack, somewhere in this water pot called Tommy. Then it doesn't matter how much you pour water into it. It will just sort of leak, right? It will keep leaking. So the wine that is produced in Tommy will not be up to the brim. See, in that story, all the water pots were filled up to the brim. So how much, depends on how much the water you have, that's how much wine being produced. So in the same way, there could be another water pot who could be, would not have any crack, who would not have any dent, but sometimes the water pots can, have you ever seen a pot, try to fill a pot that is not sitting straight? If a pot is sitting like this, you can fill it, but you can never fill it up to the brim, right? So even if we have no problem, if our life is not straightforward, if we are not straightforward enough with God, if our life is not straight enough, then the wine won't be produced to the extent that the Lord wishes, right? He has a dream for all of us. And He has decided, He has chosen to bring us from outside this auditorium. That's the funny thing. And have you ever been recently, another thing about trip to India, okay, I visited another place called Adimale. It's a hill station. And we went to one of these old hotels where we eat. And then before and after, as you know, in India, we have a custom of washing our hands, right? Just like the water pots were used for what? For the purification system, the purification according to Jewish custom, right? So that was the purpose of that water pots. So I went to this hill station hotel, and before they didn't have a tap or anything like that. They said, "Okay, there is the water pots, and go and wash your hands and come," right? So I look at that water pots, and I said, "I'm not going to go near that because it's kept in such a dirty place. And people spit around it with their pan and all that kind of stuff. It's muddy, and the water itself is so dirty." And I said, if I go to wash my hand, I have to take a bath when I come back. I'm not going to go there because it is kept at such a dirty place. And that's where these water pots were. They were not in the auditorium. They were kept outside. They were thrown away. They were rejected. But Jesus decided to bring them in. When the story begins, where are the water pots? They are all outside, right? They are not in the limelight. But when the story ends, where are the water pots? They are right in the kitchen. What is the kitchen? The most hygienic place in your house is the kitchen. Now the party is happening around these water pots. Because the water pots are wine. The party is not around the other stuff. Party is around the water pots which were rejected, thrown away, which was in a very dirty place. And that's what Jesus has done for us. We were not in the heritage of Jewish heritage where the chosen people and all that thing. But God decided He chose us, not that we chose Him. And he said, I have decided, I have chosen to fill not the wine barrel, but the water pots with water, and that water I'm going to turn into wine. How much more grateful we should be for this privilege of coming inside from the place where we were rejected and outside.